With all this uncertainty in the world, podcasting is, spoiler alert, not going to be your number one priority in your life. Okay, I know. Maybe it's already on the back burner for you, actually, and you feel this nagging feeling to do something. It's like, oh, I have my podcast. I should put out an episode. Or, oh, I want to talk about these things, but, oh, I don't know. Do I have time? It's kind of nagging you, but the overwhelm of everything else in your life either A, doesn't give you the time to record, or B, the mental capacity to say a coherent sentence at this time is truly, truly lacking. So what is it like to take a pause from your podcast and also then come back too with that intention? How do you restart or maybe reimagine your podcast if you're in a season of overwhelm or busyness, or you know what, it's been on the back burner for a while and you're like, I want to come back now. So what can you do either to prep for this pause or figuring out what it can look like when you want to come back? This is episode number 96 on the Podcaster's Guide to a Visible Voice. So let's go. Hey there, welcome to the show. This is episode number 96, as I said, but you know what? If you go back to episode 87 about doing less for your podcast, if you haven't listened to that one yet, do go and listen to that one because it'll be a great companion episode for this one. It'll give you some ideas on shifting your podcast workflow and just giving you a few more details and expansion on what I'm going to talk about today. So yeah. Bookmark that. If you haven't listened to episode 87 yet, that is the one to get to after this one, all right? So today we're going to talk about, hey, maybe somewhere along the way of your podcasting journey, you paused the show or you plan to pause it now. Or maybe you want to come back from your show. What does this all look like? Will you be getting back to the old workflow that you used to do? What worked for you then? And what would you change now? Another question could be, what did you never liked about that podcast workflow? So you would like to get rid of it or improve upon it altogether, right? Getting rid of it could just mean like skipping that step or passing it off to somebody else. So we're going to deep dive into some of these things today to maybe even reimagine what it could look like to restart that podcasting journey of yours. So the foundational question really I'm going to ask you is this the same podcast that you want to create? Or is there a new iteration for you right now in your podcasting journey? So if you're in the season of overwhelm right now and you want to reimagine what your podcast can look like in the future, we're definitely going to take a look at that in this episode. So what does restarting a podcast look like? But before we even get to that, let's take a look first at the pause. So maybe you're in that overwhelm season right now and you're like, I just have to stop cold turkey. I don't have time for this. But if you do have the bandwidth, if you do have that mental energy to create one more episode, it's best not to ghost your listeners. You know, as a listener myself, I always wonder, oh, is this person coming back? Or maybe I've noticed, they used to have a weekly show, but they haven't published this week. Oh. Sometimes I might not notice the first week, but then the second week, third week, fourth week, a month, 2 months go by, and I was like, oh yeah, I used to like listening to this show. What happened to it? It's not coming up on my feed anymore. So if you have the bandwidth, create a final episode and provide them with what your plan is so that, a few months down the road, they can still think, oh yeah, what happened to that show? I wonder if they're back yet. Or you know what? Even if you don't have a plan, let them know that you don't have a plan. That you'd like to come back. It just depends on what the situation is, right? So it just depends on your transparency and what you want to share. Some of the things that you can share are your hopes for the podcast. What do you love best about creating the show for your ideal listener? Share that as well because they want to know what's going on in your head. So could be a short solo episode that you share this. Or you can create one of your regular episodes, especially if you do interview episodes. You can tag it onto your intro and outro for the next episode that you create. The point of all of this is the intention. and making sure that your listener is on that plan as well. You don't want to just leave them in a lurch, right? Especially if you've been creating a show for quite some time. They want to know where you are on that journey and go alongside with you. So you might not have all your plans ironed out right now, but maybe this is also a good way to verbalize those ideas. I've had people do a solo episode and just start with a few bullet points and then just riff on that and figure out, okay, is this what I want to do? If I say it out loud, it might create a different meaning for you. So your episode doesn't have to be pre-planned and scripted. Freestyling it as a brainstorming session out loud can really be beneficial as well. However, if you do have a plan, great. Let your listener know. I know for me, I've always scheduled in breaks. So I talk about those pauses in my last episode before I do the break. And I'll also let my listener know when I'm back. Like I could have an exact date, or I could just say like mid-September or something like that, right? But right now, let's take a step back. So we're taking a step back even further and think about some options that you have when you come back from your break, whether it's a couple of months or it's been a whole year or more since your last episode. What's the plan? So even before you hit that record button, let's revisit our foundations. Here are some prompts for you to start thinking about what you want out of your podcast. Has your ideal listener changed? If so, how? Who is this person now? What are you passionate about currently? What new directions related to your business or work or organization that could drive new goals for your podcast? And finally, what role does your podcast play in those new goals? Does your podcast role need to shift? Earlier this year, mid-April, I was actually speaking at N10's nonprofit technology conference about just that, your podcast role. That in order to figure out the direction of your podcast, or in this case, maybe a new direction when you're coming back, we need to know what role your podcast will play for your goals. You know, things like your frequency, your length, how long your episodes are, the types of resources that go into a podcast like show notes. That will all change based on what the role of your podcast is. For example, if you're looking just to create a lot more episodes, you're like, I want to come back and I want to come back strong with weekly shows, a content role could be what you're after. But in this case, after a pause, really, do you have the bandwidth to continually create a weekly show and then repurpose that episode into other forms of content? You really got to think about your capacity as well. As another example, if you're looking to build relationships, this is usually the easiest way to create a podcast and one that you actually hear very often. They are mainly interview-style shows where you are focused on finding aligned guests to solve your ideal listeners' challenges. You are also spending time promoting that person before, during, and especially after each episode. But maybe you're looking at your podcast as a way to engage with your listeners more. So this time you want to think about spending more time on collecting questions and perhaps voice clips to add to those episodes. You're really asking for their feedback and getting those voice clips. You also could share like Q&As or Ask Me Anything, AMA type episodes to get their thoughts or opinions. So they are really engaged with you as the host. But maybe your podcast role is to be more about moving people from the podcast to another platform that you have. So whether that is going to your email list where you do the majority of your sales, or I've also seen nonprofit organizations use this to convert listeners from the podcast to paying donors and being on their email list there. So you'll be spending more time on your podcast creating story and compelling emotional connections, and knowing that this then requires more highly produced podcasts with like music and sound effects and clips of people's stories. So capacity-wise, this is going to be upping your game. Or maybe it's about thought leadership. You know what? I really want to hone in on this thought leadership piece for my podcast. You have ideas to share, so you mainly want to have solo episodes. Well, you'll never run out of things to talk about. So in this capacity piece, you're going to be doing a lot of that prep work. You want to be the authority in your industry where you're going to have high-level conversations take place. So you really got to map out what you want to talk about. You'll focus on a lot of details for actionable items and takeaways for your listener beyond the show notes, because If I'm learning from you, I also want to learn from you maybe on your blog or newsletter. I want to sign up for that. You've got a whole ecosystem to spread your message, and podcasting is just one part of that. So overall, what role do you see your podcast taking shape as? Because once you know that, we can take a look at options to coming back or reimagining your show. So now when you do come back, what are you going to do differently, if any? I was talking with Craig Constantine. He was actually on my podcast a little while back, but then I was on his show called Pod Talk. And that was an episode, I think it came out in late March. I'll share the link with you in the show notes. I was actually his first guest after he had a very long break. I think he said at least a year. It was a year before he had me as a published episode. So he had a fantastic workflow that worked for him. Remember, he talked about that on my show. So what he did for restarting Pod Talk was essentially the exact same show. He didn't do anything different, and he just came back with a new episode saying in his intro that he's back after a break, and there's nothing wrong with doing just that. If you want to go back to what worked for you before, that's totally cool. But if you want to change things up, especially due to that capacity piece, whether it's frequency, meaning how often you publish, or going with or without guests, or maybe the length of the episode. Maybe you're like, yeah, I just want to do a lot shorter episodes now. This would be great to either say it in your new episode or create a whole new trailer. Because if it's a totally different style of show, a new trailer would be great to help advertise that, right, for that organic search. So this becomes your new featured episode. And especially for those that are newly discovering your podcast, that organic search, they'll know exactly what the new shows is all about. And actually, even before you hit record, like I always say, it's all about the pre-stuff. What will your new workflow look like? If you've never done guests before, how will you now incorporate a system into your show to bring guests on? If you were too busy before, does this new workflow actually work with your current capacity? And how are you integrating your podcast tasks maybe into your calendar so that you actually do those tasks? Maybe you need some reminders on your phone. Do you have a team maybe you can assign some tasks to, or they can send you those reminders? I want to make sure that in 3 or 6 months' time down the road, you are not back to this overwhelm stage if you can avoid it. The capacity to create a podcast is probably more than you actually think. I know a lot of people always go into podcasting thinking, oh yeah, you just hit record and then you publish it, right? Well, in fact, I know if your podcast is tied to your work, if you're an entrepreneur, or you have it tied to your organization, or maybe if it's just a huge passion project, it's going to take a few more hours than you think. Podcasting is a lot of work, but there's value to this work, and it's fun. Like, who doesn't love doing something fun? And it's when it stops being fun, when the overwhelm presents itself, that we feel like we need that break, right? So I was thinking back to my show. It feels like it's always been with a season. People always say like, oh yeah, you can create seasons, right? Like on TV shows, you create a season. Podcasting similar. For me, I created my show with breaks in between these seasons to deal with that overwhelm piece in my life. There are two series every year for me. I take a pause between December and February. And then also in the summer, July and August. So I need that time to recalibrate, to rest, and also to figure out, okay, what am I really passionate about right now that I want to talk about in this season, right? So give or take a few weeks or so of that time frame, I usually have those breaks. And my podcast doesn't have any themes or true story arcs to justify like an actual season. So some people might call it a series where you do a certain amount, maybe have a broad theme around it for a number of episodes, and then you take a break. I could more broadly associate with that, like a series versus seasons, but technicality, right? It doesn't matter what you call it. But in my mind, listeners are still going to listen as long as they understand what the cadence or frequency is. You don't ghost them. You let them know on the last episode before there is a break. So a lot of my listeners know that I will take a break during my winter and my summer because we're all doing things during that time of year, and I need the break and I need to spend time with my family. So they'll know, right? Right? Okay, so we're going to take a look now at what you can do to shift it back to that fun piece I was mentioning earlier. There's no one way or one right answer to have fun, right? Everybody has fun in their own way. But I just want you to consider that breaks are totally okay. In fact, they are needed. I know in the world of content and fear of missing out, you feel some outside pressure to continually create. Maybe it's just our society, but really, you don't have to. Like I said, I do it for my sanity. I do it for my family. The breaks come first. You schedule that in. You know, we might think we have to do weekly episodes, but we don't. So unless you are a big celebrity podcast with a big advertising revenue behind you who says you need to have weekly content, we don't. That's not the podcast that we're creating. In fact, it's because of advertising that we have sort of this unspoken rule about content creation. But in podcasting, that kind of goes against that traditional idea, the traditional broadcast idea with advertisers, right? That you are, as a podcaster, not tied to any fixed schedule, that you are not beholden to any advertisers that way. And yet, even if you are, you do have advertisers, can you incorporate these ads into your new reimagined schedule? So do you want to do sprints? Maybe you batch record on a whole new different level, right? There are lots of options that you can still do a bunch of recording, but then being able to edit and schedule and have them out there so you don't just have a whole bunch of recordings and nothing ever gets done with it, right? Because after you record, there's still lots to do in that process to get that podcast out there. So lots of options, lots of things to think about and mull over. So I'd love to hear your ideas. What is working for you? Or if you're in a season of overwhelm, what's stopping you from, stopping, right? I want to know. You can send me a voice note from my website, visiblevoicepodcast.com, or you can also email me, as usual, visiblevoicepodcast@gmail.com. I know right now I am just figuring out my last few episodes before I go on my summer break. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm already thinking about a summer break, but that's what you got to do when you're planning in advance. You were recording this maybe a few weeks ahead of time because you want to get to that break. So do you have the capacity to do that? I'd love to know. What are you doing with your podcast to build in those breaks? On the next episode, next time, we're going to hear from someone who wanted to create a space for affirming, learning, and healing. So she turned to a podcast. I'm going to be in conversation with Chid Suzanne, founder of the award-winning But What Do I Know podcast, where she merges her love for community building and development with her passion for storytelling and facilitating conversations. She's got a fantastic podcasting journey story to share with you, so you're going to learn a lot from her. So chat with you then. Thank you so much for listening to the Podcaster's Guide to a Visible Voice. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love it if you'd share it with a podcasting friend. And to reveal more voicing and podcasting tips, click on over to visiblevoicepodcast.com. Until next time. Let's go!